Welcome. This is The Bass, the River, and Sheila Mant by W.D. Wetherell, Part 2. So if you didn't watch Part 1, go back and do that first, obviously, because this won't make a whole lot of sense. So this is Part 2. Go back and watch Part 1 if needed. Just as some quick reminders from Part 1. So you have the young narrator. He's 14 years old. He asked out the 17-year-old neighbor. She said, yes, we're going to see this band, but they're taking a canoe to get there. He's 14. He can't drive. She keeps mentioning the car, but he can't drive. So the date is proceeding, and he set up his fishing equipment just as he normally would if he were going out in the canoe. And in the process of talking with Sheila, she says that she thinks fishing is really dumb. And a moment later, as he's trying to hide the fishing gear he has in the canoe that's set up fishing, he catches, or hooks, I should say, a largemouth bass. And he realizes that this is a serious bass that he has hooked. All right, so we'll pick up with what we read at the end of Part 1, where it says, 4 things occurred to me at once. 1, that it was a bass. 2, that it was a big bass. 3, that it was the biggest bass I had ever hooked. 4, that Sheila Mant must not know. What was that? She said, turning half around. What was what? That buzzing noise. Bats. She shuddered, quickly drew her feet back into the canoe. Every instinct I had told me to pick up the rod and strike back at the bass, but there was no need to. It was already solidly hooked. Downstream, an awesome distance downstream, it jumped clear of the water, landing with a concussion heavy enough to ripple the entire river. For a moment, I thought it was gone, but then the rod was bending again, the tip dancing into the water. Slowly, not making any motion that might alert Sheila, I reached down to tighten the drag. While all this was going on, Sheila had begun talking, and it was a few minutes before I was able to catch up with her train of thought. I went to a party there, these fraternity men. Catherine says I could get it in there if I wanted. I'm thinking more of UVM or Bennington, somewhere I can ski. The bass was slanting toward the rocks on the New Hampshire side by the ruins of Donaldson's boathouse. It had to be an old bass. A young one probably wouldn't have known the rocks were there. I brought the canoe back into the middle of the river, hoping to head it off. That's neat, I mumbled. Skiing, yeah, I can see that. Eric said I have the figure to model, but I thought I should get an education first. I mean, it might be a while before I get started and all. I was thinking of getting my hair styled, more swept back. I mean, Anne Margaret, like hers, only shorter. She hesitated. Are we going backwards? We were. I had managed to keep the bass in the middle of the river away from the rocks, but it had plenty of room there, and for the first time, a chance to exert its full strength. I quickly computed the weight necessary to draw a fully loaded canoe backward. The thought of it made me feel faint. So the bass is hooked, and however big the bass is, it is strong enough that it is pulling the canoe with the narrator, Sheila Mant, and a bunch of other stuff. It is pulling the canoe up the stream. All right, so this is a very large fish. And, he said it made me feel faint to think of, this could be the biggest fish he has ever caught in his life, all right, which would be very exciting to a fisherman. Be excited to regular people too. Let's see how the date continues. It's just the current, I said hoarsely. No sweat or anything. I dug in deeper with my paddle. Reassured, Sheila began talking about something else, but all my attention was taken up now with the fish. I could feel its desperation as the water grew shallower. I could sense this extra strain on the line, the frantic way it cut back and forth in the water. I could visualize what it looked like, the gape of its mouth, the flared gills and thick vertical tail. The bass couldn't have encountered many forces in its long life that it wasn't capable of handling, and the unrelenting tug at its mouth must have been a source of great puzzlement and mounting panic. Me, I had problems of my own. To get to Dixford, I had to paddle up a sluggish stream that came into the river beneath a covered bridge. There was a shallow sandbar at the mouth of this stream, weeds on one side, rocks on the other. Without doubt, this is where I would lose the fish. I have to be careful with my complexion. I tan, but in segments. I can't figure out if it's even worth it. I wouldn't even do it, probably. I saw Jackie Kennedy in Boston, and she wasn't tan at all. Taking a deep breath, I paddled as hard as I could for the middle, deepest part of the bar. I could have threaded the eye of a needle with the canoe, but the pull on the stern threw me off, and I overcompensated. The canoe veered left and scraped bottom. I pushed the paddle down and shoved. A moment of hesitation. A moment more. The canoe shot clear into the deeper water of the stream. I immediately looked down at the rod. It was bent in the same tight arc. Miraculously, the bass was still on. The moon was out now. It was low and full enough that its beam shone directly on Sheila there ahead of me in the canoe, washing her in a creamy, luminous glow. I could see the lithe, easy shape of her figure. I could see the way her hair curled down off her shoulders, the proud, alert tilt of her head. And all of these things were as a tug on my heart. Not just Sheila, but the aura she carried about her of parties and casual touchings and grace. Behind me, I could feel the strain of the bass, steadier now, growing weaker. And this was another tug on my heart. Not just the bass, but the beat of the river, and the slant of the stars, and the smell of the night, until finally it seemed I would be torn apart between longings, split in half. 20 yards ahead of us was the road, and once I pulled the canoe up on shore, the bass would be gone, irretrievably gone. If instead I stood up, grabbed the rod, and started pumping, I would have it. As tired as the bass was, there was no chance it could get away. I reached down for the rod, hesitated, looked up to where Sheila was stretching herself lazily toward the sky, her small breasts rising beneath the soft fabric of her dress, and the tug was too much for me. And quicker than it takes to write down, I pulled a penknife from my pocket and cut the line in half. With a sick, nauseous feeling in my stomach, I saw the rod unbend. My legs are sore, Sheila whined. Are we there yet? Through a superhuman effort of self-control, I was able to beach the canoe and help Sheila off. The rest of the night is much foggier. We walked to the fair. There was a smell of popcorn, the sound of guitars. I may have danced once or twice with her, but all I ever really remember is her coming over to me once the music was done to explain that she would be going home in Eric Caswell's Corvette. Okay, I mumbled. For the first time that night, she looked at me, really looked at me. You're a funny kid, you know that? Funny, different, dreamy, odd. How many times was I to hear that in the years to come? All spoken with the same quizzical, half-accusatory tone Sheila used then. Poor Sheila. Before the month was over, the spell she cast over me was gone. But the memory of that lost bass haunted me all summer and haunts me still. There would be other Sheila Mants in my life, other fish. And though I came close once or twice, it was these secret, hidden tuggings in the night that claimed me, and I never made the same mistake again. All right. So he picks Sheila over the bass, but doesn't feel good about that decision immediately after. And years later, when he's recounting this story, he still doesn't feel good about that decision. But it seems that maybe it taught him a lesson that he carried with him beyond that moment, and even to the moment where he's telling this story to us.